What if everything you knew about the universe was wrong? What if the species you dismissed as primitive, fragile and insignificant turned out to be something far, far older than your entire civilization? Something that had been fighting wars, surviving extinction events, and clawing its way through the cosmos, while your ancestors were still single-celled organisms floating in primordial soup. Well, that is exactly what happened to me, and let me tell you, it was not a pleasant revelation. My name is Velkrix, and I am a senior medical examiner aboard the Galactic Union vessel, Persistence of Memory. I have conducted over 40,000 medical evaluations across 312 species. I have seen biology that would make your circulatory system reverse itself. I have catalogued anomalies that required entirely new branches of xenomedicine to explain. I thought I had seen everything. I was wrong. It started on a routine patrol in the Kepler Reach, a quiet sector known primarily for its mineral-rich asteroid belts, and absolutely nothing else of interest. We had picked up a distress signal from a small transport vessel, the kind of unremarkable ship that ferries cargo between colonies. When we brought the survivors aboard, there were only 3 of them. 2 Milvari, a species known for their excellent bookkeeping skills and complete inability to handle stress, and 1 human. The human introduced himself as Marcus Webb. He was tall by human standards, broad-shouldered, with dark skin and short-cropped grey hair that suggested considerable age by their species' standards. His handshake was firm but not aggressive. His smile was polite but guarded. Everything about him screamed ordinary. I should have known better. The Milvari were easy to process. Minor bruising, elevated stress hormones, nothing that a few hours of rest and some mild sedatives would not fix. They were practically bouncing off the walls with anxiety, talking over each other in their high-pitched voices about the pirate attack that had crippled their ship. Marcus Webb, on the other hand, sat quietly on the examination table, watching me with an expression I could not quite read. Patience, perhaps. Or amusement. It was hard to tell with humans. Their faces did far too many things at once. I initiated the standard medical scan protocol, running my diagnostic array across his biological systems. Height, weight, temperature, respiratory function, cardiac rhythm, all within normal parameters for his species. I was about to clear him for quarters when the deep tissue scan results populated on my screen, and then I stopped breathing. For a moment I thought my equipment had malfunctioned. I ran the scan again. Same results. I ran it a 3rd time, adjusting for potential interference. Same results. I felt my primary heart rate spike as I stared at the data, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Marcus Webb's skeleton was a battlefield. I do not mean that metaphorically. I mean that his bones showed evidence of trauma that should not have been possible. Healed fractures in patterns that suggested impacts from weapons that had not existed for millions of years. Micro-scarring consistent with energy weapons that predated the Galactic Union by epochs. Regenerated tissue around wounds that appeared to have been inflicted by claws belonging to species that had been extinct since before my people developed written language. I looked up at him, my mandibles clicking together in confusion. He was watching me with that same unreadable expression, though now I thought I detected something else in his eyes. Weariness, perhaps. Or resignation. I said, in my most professional tone, Mr. Webb. There appear to be some anomalies in your scan results. He tilted his head slightly. Anomalies? Yes. Your skeletal structure shows evidence of extensive historical trauma. Some of these injuries appear to be, well, they appear to be quite old. How old? I consulted my screen again, hoping the numbers had somehow changed. They had not. Based on the cellular degradation patterns and the regenerative markers, some of these injuries appear to predate the formation of the Galactic Union. Marcus Webb did not react. He just sat there, looking at me with those strange human eyes, and for the first time since I had begun my career in xenomedicine, I felt genuinely unsettled by a patient. He said, "Is that a problem?" I blinked at him. "Mr. Webb, the Galactic Union was formed 6,000 years ago. You are human. Your species has only been spacefaring for approximately 300 years. The mathematics here do not They do not align. He smiled then, but it was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they are remembering something painful, something they would rather forget. He said, "Doctor, those scars are from before your species existed." I stared at him. I could not help it. I had conducted over 40,000 medical evaluations, and I had never, not once, been rendered completely speechless. But in that moment I had absolutely nothing to say. He continued, his voice quiet but steady. "Do you know what a Thyraxxian is?" I felt my circulatory system go cold. The Thyraxxians were a footnote in ancient history. A warrior species that had terrorized the galaxy approximately 400,000 years ago before abruptly disappearing. Some historians theorized they had wiped themselves out. Others believed they had simply moved on to another galaxy. No one knew for certain, because there was no one left alive who had ever encountered them. I said, "The Thyraxxians have been extinct for hundreds of thousands of years." Marcus Webb nodded slowly. "Yes, they have." He touched a spot on his left shoulder, absently, as if feeling for something beneath the skin. "I killed the last one. It was not easy. They were fast, and they were mean, and they really did not like losing." I pulled up the scan of his shoulder on my screen. There was indeed an old wound there. Deep tissue damage, healed over, but still visible. The pattern was consistent with penetrating trauma from a curved, serrated implement. A claw, perhaps, or a talon. I said, "Mr. Webb, what you are suggesting is impossible." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something ancient in his gaze. Something that had seen too much, survived too much, lost too much. He said, "Doctor, I am going to tell you a story, and you are not going to believe it. But I need you to listen anyway, because the truth is important, even when it is uncomfortable. Especially when it is uncomfortable. I should have called security. I should have reported this conversation to Captain Maridax immediately. I should have done any number of things that protocol demanded. Instead, I sat down. And I listened. Marcus Webb told me about the Thyraxxians. He told me about fighting them in the outer reaches of the galaxy, in a war that lasted for 3,000 years. He told me about the weapons they used, the worlds they burned, the species they consumed. He told me about standing on the corpse of a dead planet, surrounded by the bodies of his enemies, knowing that he had won but feeling no victory in it. He told me about the Vex Collective, a hive mind that had emerged in the aftermath of the Thyraxxian extinction. He told me about watching them spread across the galaxy like a cancer, absorbing everything in their path, until he and a small group of survivors had found a way to sever their neural network and watch the entire collective collapse into chaos. He told me about the Silence, a period of galactic history that had been erased from every record, every archive, every memory, except his own. A time when the universe had held its breath and waited to see if anything would survive. He told me about Earth, about his home, about the small blue planet that had produced a species capable of surviving everything the galaxy could throw at them, not because they were the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced, but because they simply refused to stop. I listened to all of it, and when he was finished, I sat there in silence, trying to process what I had just heard. Finally I said, "Why are you telling me this?" He smiled again, that same sad, tired smile. "Because you asked about the scars, and the scars have stories, and stories deserve to be told." I looked down at my screen, at the impossible evidence of impossible history written across this man's bones. I said, "How old are you, Mr. Webb?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Old enough to know that age is just a number, and numbers do not mean much when you have seen what I have seen." That was not an answer, but somehow it was enough. I cleared him for quarters. I filed my report, carefully omitting any reference to our conversation, and I watched him walk away, this ordinary-looking human with his extraordinary history, and I wondered how many more like him were out there. How many secrets were walking among us? How many scars were hidden beneath the surface? And I realized, with a cold certainty that settled into my bones, that I had just been given a glimpse of something far bigger than myself. Far bigger than the Galactic Union. Far bigger than anything I had ever imagined. The humans were not newcomers to the galaxy. They were survivors, and they had been here all along. I could not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the scan results, those impossible fractures, those ancient wounds, the evidence of battles fought before my species had even crawled out of the ocean. I told myself I was being irrational. I told myself that Marcus Webb was clearly delusional, suffering from some form of psychological breakdown that had manifested as elaborate historical fantasies. I told myself that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything he had said. I did not believe any of it. The next morning, I found myself standing outside the guest quarters where we had assigned him. I had no official reason to be there. No medical justification. I was simply drawn to him, the way you are drawn to a puzzle you cannot solve. A mystery that refuses to let you go. He opened the door before I could knock. He said, "Dr. Velkrix, I was wondering when you would show up." I said, "How did you know I was coming?" He smiled. "I have been doing this for a very long time. You learn to recognize the look." "What look?" "The look of someone whose entire worldview just got kicked in the teeth." I could not argue with that. He stepped aside and let me enter. The quarters were standard issue, small but functional, with a bed, a desk, and a viewport showing the stars outside. He had not unpacked. His single bag sat unopened on the floor as if he was used to leaving at a moment's notice. I said, "I have questions." He sat down on the edge of the bed and gestured for me to take the chair. "I expected you would." I did not sit. I could not. I was too agitated, too full of nervous energy that needed somewhere to go. I paced instead, my claws clicking against the floor as I tried to organize my thoughts into something coherent. I said, "If what you told me is true, if even a fraction of it is accurate, then everything we know about galactic history is wrong." He nodded. "Yes. The Thyraxxians, the Vex Collective, the Silence. None of these events are in any historical record. None of them appear in any archive." "How is that possible?" He leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Have you ever heard of the Great Filter?" I stopped pacing. The Great Filter was a theoretical concept, a hypothetical barrier that prevented civilizations from advancing beyond a certain point. It was the answer to the Fermi paradox, the explanation for why the galaxy seemed so empty despite the mathematical probability of abundant intelligent life. I said, "It is a theory, a way of explaining the apparent absence of advanced civilizations in observable space." He said, "It is not a theory, it is a policy." I stared at him. "What?" He stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. His reflection in the glass looked tired. "Ancient," he said. "The galaxy is not empty, Doctor. It is managed. There are forces out there, old forces, that have decided what information gets preserved and what gets erased, what species get to remember their history, and what species get to start fresh. The Galactic Union thinks it is the pinnacle of civilization. The truth is, you are the latest iteration, one of many, and you have no idea what came before you because you were not supposed to know." I felt my legs weaken. I sat down heavily in the chair, my mind reeling. I said, "That is insane." He turned to look at me. "Is it? Think about it. How many gaps are there in your historical records? How many periods where the data just stops? How many species that appear fully formed with no evolutionary predecessors?" I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, but I could not, because he was right. There were gaps. Enormous gaps. Periods of galactic history that were simply blank, attributed to data loss or cosmic catastrophe, or any number of convenient explanations. I said, "Why are you still here? If these forces are real, if they are erasing history, why have they not erased you?" He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "They have tried, many times, but I am very good at surviving, and I have learned how to stay under the radar, move quietly, keep a low profile, do not attract attention." He gestured around the small quarters. "This is what that looks like, a cargo ship, a minor route, no one important, nothing to see here." I said, "But you told me, you showed me the scars." Why would you risk exposing yourself? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because I am tired, Doctor. I have been fighting for so long, surviving for so long, and sometimes you just need someone to know the truth. Even if it is only one person, even if it does not change anything.
I understood that.
More than I wanted to admit, I understood that. The loneliness of carrying a burden that no one else could see, the exhaustion of being the only one who knew. I said, what do you want from me? He said, nothing. I do not want anything. I just wanted someone to listen. You did that? It is enough. It was not enough. Not for me. I had spent my entire career documenting the biology of the galaxy, cataloguing the endless variations of life that the universe had produced. And now I was being told that all of it, every scan, every sample, every record, was just a fraction of a much larger story, a story that had been deliberately hidden. I could not let that go. I said, there must be something I can do, some way to verify what you are telling me. He considered this. Then he said, there is one thing, but you are not going to like it. Tell me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. It looked like a data chip, but the design was unfamiliar. The markings on its surface were in a language I did not recognize. He said, this is a memory core. It contains records from before the last reset. Historical data, biological archives, cultural artifacts. Everything the managers tried to erase. I reached for it, but he pulled it back. He said, if you access this, you cannot unlearn what you see. And there are people out there who will do anything to keep this information buried. You will become a target. Your life will never be the same. I looked at him, at this impossible human with his impossible history and his impossible offer. I said, my life has not been the same since I scanned your skeleton. He laughed. It was a real laugh, warm and genuine, and for a moment he looked almost young. He said, fair enough. He handed me the chip. I took it. And in that moment I knew that everything was about to change. 3 days later, we dropped Marcus Webb at a small colony station on the edge of the Kepler Reach. He shook my hand before he left, and he said, be careful with that information, Doctor. It is a weapon. Use it wisely. I said, will I see you again? He smiled. Probably not. But that is okay. I have a feeling you are going to do just fine. He walked away, disappearing into the crowd of travelers and merchants and ordinary people going about their ordinary lives, and then he was gone. I never saw him again. But I kept the memory core. I studied it in secret, accessing its contents in small doses, learning the true history of the galaxy one fragment at a time. I saw the rise and fall of civilizations that had been erased from existence. I saw wars that had shaped the cosmos and been forgotten. I saw the faces of species that no longer existed, and I heard their voices, and I mourned for them. And I saw humans. Throughout all of it, woven through every era, every conflict, every catastrophe. Always there. Always surviving. Always fighting for something larger than themselves. They were not newcomers. They were not primitives. They were the oldest continuous civilization in the galaxy. And they had been protecting us all along. I think about Marcus Webb sometimes. I wonder where he is now, what battles he is fighting, what scars he is collecting. I wonder if he ever found peace, or if peace is even possible for someone who has lived as long as he has. I do not know the answers, but I know this much. The next time someone tells me that humans are young, or fragile, or insignificant, I am going to smile politely and say nothing, because I know better now. I have seen the scars, and I know what they mean.